Hi, all, welcome. We are going to give this another couple minutes. So probably at about 6:02 is when we're going to go ahead and get started. So hang tight for a little bit. Welcome. Got about one more minute, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. All righty. Hello, and welcome to this evening's Zoom webinar that's been hosted by the Honors College at West Virginia University. This event is the first of our 5 faculty fellow lectures taking place this fall semester. These lectures are designed to allow each Honors College Fellow an opportunity to provide an inside look into the innovative course they are currently teaching within the Honors College and will be teaching next spring semester. I am Damian Clement, Associate Dean for WVU's Honors College. Tonight's lecture is entitled Extending Reality with David Smith. David Smith is a teaching assistant professor at West Virginia University's Reed College of Media. We will follow our standard Zoom webinar format this evening. After the presentation, we will host an open question and answer session. Since we're using the Zoom webinar platform for this lecture, before we begin, let me review some of the features that will help you experience this evening's lecture in the best way possible. If you have issues with audio or video at any point during the webinar, be sure to check your personal Zoom settings and your computer volume controls. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Due to enhanced security protocols, webinar attendees will not be able to see other questions, only their own. To ask a question, you must click on the Q&A button. A separate screen will appear, then you may type your question. The presenter will answer all questions live at the end of the presentation. If live captioning has been requested, it can be viewed by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If live captioning was not requested, a captioned version of this recording will be available at honors.wvu.edu. And now let's get started with this evening's lecture. David, I am pleased to welcome David Smith to our first faculty fellow lecture. All right, David.
All right. Thank you, Damian. I'm honored to be a faculty fellow this year. So as Damian mentioned, I teach at the Reed College of Media. My background is visual journalism. I worked in news for about 10 years as a visual journalist, photo and video. So now I teach multimedia storytelling at the College of Media. But since about 2016, I've been working in VR, AR, VR, 360 video. And I'm really excited about this class because it brings a lot of my experience that I've had, and also offers students across the university an opportunity to experience it and learn a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about AR and VR. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the course at the end, but I think it's probably best if we define a few things because there's a lot of terms that are thrown around in this space. And then introduce some interesting concepts that we're going to talk about in the course. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Oh no, I got the dreaded, I'm gonna have to quit and reopen. I'm sorry, Damien. I'm gonna have to quit and come back to this to share my
Not a
screen.
problem, not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. So hold on there for a minute, folks. Technical difficulties, one of the joys of Zoom. So hope the first week of the semester has treated you all well. I think you all have made it through week 1. Well, I believe tomorrow would be week 1. Hope things are going well. Just going to make a public service announcement. I see a person, somebody's on a phone. So if you are on that,
apologies.
All righty, you ready? Did I?
Okay, I'll share again. Here we go.
Oh. Hold on here. Okay, now you're a co-host. All right, there we go.
There we go. Okay, you can see that, right? Okay, great start. Okay, so the class that I'm teaching is called Extending Reality. So it's kind of a abstract idea, right? But I'd like to start with an early experiment in augmented reality, and then we'll go into defining augmented reality.
Pepper's Ghost was a Victorian theatrical illusion. The audience saw a ghost suddenly appear on stage with a strange transparent quality which instantly disappeared soon afterwards. The first time the ghost was shown was on Christmas Eve 1862 as part of a performance of a story by Charles Dickens called The Haunted Man and the Ghost's Bargain, and it caused a complete sensation. It was all over the newspapers and the public flocked to see it. And this included Queen Victoria's eldest son, Prince Albert. But the thing to remember is that Pepper was quite different from a magician in that he told his audience exactly how it was done. The essential principle of the Pepper's Ghost illusion was a reflection in a sheet of glass. So originally, a huge sheet of glass projected from the front of the stage at an angle towards the audience, and when a bright spotlight was shone on that actor, his reflection would appear in the sheet of glass, and then to make the ghost vanish, you simply switch off the spotlight and he vanishes in an instant. So the version of Pepper's Ghost we have in the Buckingham Palace Summer Opening exhibition essentially follows the original, but the difference is rather than having a live actor being reflected in the sheet of glass, the actors are recorded on video and then projected onto a screen, and it's the screen that's reflected in the glass to create the illusion. So it's using the very best in Victorian technology, but given a 21st century twist.
David, we can't hear you, you're muted.
This is going great so far, sorry. So Pepper's Ghost caused a huge sensation, right? Led to a lot of other performances using that similar technology. Even today, you see like experiments in holographic versions of this. Like there was a performance by Madonna, Kanye West tried one at Coachella. Just a couple weeks ago, you saw a holographic Harry Carey at the classic baseball game, Major League Baseball game. It's kind of weird. They're pretty funny and people laugh at them, right? But even if it's done clumsily, it's still, we love to be tricked by illusions like this. It's a novelty because it opens our minds to possibilities that we hadn't previously imagined. Which brings me to Descartes. And I'm not a philosopher, armchair philosopher, or whatever, appreciator. Descartes was the guy, said, I think, therefore I am. But he was trying to get at like, what is reality? Like, what is truth? And how do we know that we exist? And he came up with a thought experiment when he's trying to, suss this out. And he didn't think that we could trust our own senses and that our senses are preventing us from seeing the truth. So how do we get beyond our own physical senses that can be corrupted by our preconceptions, our biases that blind us to the truth. And in an effort to do this, he imagined what he called a genius demon. And it's just a thought experiment that maybe a genius demon had deceived him by recreating the world and all of his senses, controlling his mind and making him imagine what we perceive of as reality. It's a useful tactic to force you to question your preconceived notions. And the way he presented it was, I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colors, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams, which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. I shall consider myself as not having hands or eyes, or flesh or blood or senses, but as falsely believing that I have all of these things. This is a way that he was, it was a thought experiment to try to get him to suspend his preconceived notions, right? And I kind of think that if we're talking about like augmented and virtual reality, this is kind of the ultimate potential of augmented and virtual reality, is that it's a way for us to get beyond our sensory limitations temporarily and kind of access something deeper and imagine things that we didn't think was possible. And I love this is from a book called Reality Plus from last year. This is kind of an extension of that, the brain in the vat. It's like, the Matrix, right? There's an evil demon that's controlling us and making us think that we're thinking things, right? So let's kind of define what we're talking about. I just want to define a few terms here because we talk about extending reality. Define like XR, define spatial computing and metaverse. And you probably heard metaverse a lot, especially in the last year. XR can be viewed as like a placeholder. The X could be viewed as a placeholder, right? So it's augmented reality or virtual reality, or even mixed reality is another term that Microsoft has come up with. All of these things kind of fit under the umbrella of XR. Also extended reality. So it's kind of another way to explain or to define this field. So all of these things fall into XR. That's why you often hear people talk about XR. So XR is and AR and VR kind of exist along a spectrum of different levels of immersion. So if you think about the real world on one end of the spectrum, and even beyond virtual reality, like the brain-computer interfaces that we've heard of, Elon Musk has been playing with monkeys with brain-computer interfaces, but even not even that complex. But and in between those two, there are different levels of immersion and digital physical data interacting, right? So augmented reality with virtual objects in the real world, where you would take like, on an AR headset, you would project like virtual objects over the world that you're viewing. You can look through the screen. Augmented virtual reality, where you would take like real objects, maybe scans of real objects, and put them into a virtual environment, and then complete computer-generated environment in virtual reality. So you can think about that as the spectrum of all the things that fall under the XR umbrella. Real world on one end, the matrixy brain-computer interfaces on the other end. And just to like give you all a visual of what we're talking about here, AR, in other words, there's headset-based AR, which is like the Microsoft HoloLens or even a Magic Leap, or other, Snapchat has come out with some, Facebook's come out with some, wearable glasses. Also mobile AR, Snapchat filters, Instagram filters, any kind of effects that you can view on a phone. And then back to like, back to the 80s, there's Murder, She Wrote. But you probably recognize more the Oculus Quest, the standalone VR headset where you're viewing it completely in VR. So this is kind of one of the things that I want the students to think about in the class is number one, how do you interact with the real world? How do you move through it? We use our five senses. We move through it. We physically move through a three-dimensional space, right? But then think about how do you interact with the digital world, as it exists now, ways that we interact with the digital world. Not really necessarily in three dimensions. We obviously viewed a few TV, we watch TV, we use our phones, we use different peripherals, keyboards, mice, that kind of thing. So I think that this AR and XR and AR represents like kind of a shift in how we interact with digital information, from flat interaction with digital information to more of a three-dimensional view of interaction with digital information, from screen-based to more world-based. So we're talking about like spatial computing, which I'll talk about in just a second, and more from like more of a passive interaction with digital information to more interactive. And we can also think about like, you know, interfaces that we use, whether it's you know, computers or headsets or whatever, kind of moving toward more immersive and disappearing interfaces. So where you would use like a single computer, or you would interact with multiple computers, now we're talking about in virtual reality, you would be completely immersed in a digital environment, and you know, in augmented reality, or in using an augmented interaction, whether it's a headset or something else, you would be interacting with one computer on your face that also takes all the information and filters it through the headset. So, okay, so what we're talking about is really ultimately like putting a screen in front of your face, right? How is it different than interacting with any other 2D screen? So like to think about like what makes XR unique. So when we're talking about XR, again, augmented virtual reality, some key characteristics of XR that makes it different from 2D interaction. Number one, it's interactive in real time. So you do something and it responds to you as you interact with it, any digital information. The user has an independent view of the environment that they can control. And there's a sense of immersion and presence. I think that's probably what the key part of this is, like you feel like it's real. So we're back to kind of tricking your brain to think that there are things there that aren't there. So that was XR. Onto the idea of like spatial computing. So this is actually from a kind of a dystopian video from a few years ago about augmented reality and bad UX gone wild. But the idea is, spatial computing is the idea of like digital information and the physical environment interacting and being able to either project or draw information from the devices in the physical environment and project them into your view. And some possibilities that are unlocked by spatial computing are increased understanding of physical, often invisible relationships between objects. So if you have something that's you know, on an assembly line that you can draw data from, you can connect that kind of data to the actual physical environment by wearing a headset. You can also make interactions between human spaces and digital information a little more seamless. And then also the use of digital twins, which I'll talk about in just a second, makes it easier to simulate reality and processes. And you see this a lot in you know, industry applications. So now we're going to move on and talk about kind of a loaded term, the metaverse. But first, I want to talk about this is the Gartner hype cycle for emerging technology. And if you have anybody who's working in industries where you see a lot of emerging technology, you might be familiar with this. Every year, Gartner, a research firm, puts out a new hype cycle for emerging technology, and I think that it's important. So every year, it's they take new emerging technology and place it along this wave, right? This spectrum, and every emerging technology has a technology trigger where people realize that it actually exists. And then eventually we get to the peak of inflated expectations where we expect it to do a lot more than it actually can, whether it's like AI or augmented reality, virtual reality. And then like is the case of the metaverse or NFTs or whatever, you move into the trough of disillusionment where people are just like, this is lame and it doesn't really do what it's promised or what it has promised. And then we move into what's called the slope of enlightenment, where people realize, okay, what are the actual applications of this technology? We were promised all of this, it wasn't living up to expectations, but how can we actually use it? And then we move into a plateau of productivity. A lot of this augmented and virtual reality are moving into that stage, right? So I just pulled up the one from 2018 and the one from 2022. And these are broken up into like the horizon. So anything with a yellow diamond or yellow triangle is more than 10 years. Anything with a gray circle would be less than 2 years. And you can see there are a lot of things that are along this line that have like a really long horizon where they expect it to move into productivity down the road. You can see in 2018, augmented reality moving into the trough of disillusionment. We had a lot of hype around augmented and virtual reality. And people were like, oh, they were realizing that it couldn't live up to that hype. But now we're moving into the plateau of productivity, right? And you can see over here in 2022, we have a lot of terms and a lot of technology that's kind of moved toward the trough of disillusionment. NFTs, kind of on the downside. People are realizing they don't have quite the possibility that, or they can't realize the promise, right? And then we have terms like, Web3, digital humans. All of these are kind of moving along the inflated expectations. So where are we with the metaverse? Okay, so let's go back to, I put quotes around the metaverse because no one can really define that. And if anybody tells you they have the definition for the metaverse, then don't believe them. I think it's not really clearly defined yet. And there are a lot of people and companies who are trying to define it. But the term has its roots in a sci-fi novel from the 90s called Snow Crash. And it's kind of a dystopian novel, ironically, where people were escaping to the metaverse to escaping to the metaverse to get away from their dystopian reality. And a lot of the ideas that are used and discussed when we talk about the metaverse, it comes straight from science fiction. I'm not going to play the Ready Player One trailer here, but that's one version of it, right? Playing on nostalgia. But one way we can think about this is like the metaverse is like an online persistent and interactive environment where you can interact with other people in 3D. Now when my 9-year-old daughter plays Roblox, is she in the metaverse? Well, kind of. I think a lot of people would define that as part of the metaverse, although it's a closed garden or a walled garden, closed environment that's only in itself, it's not interconnected. Same thing with Fortnite. So there's a lot of money going into all of these metaverse technologies. But if you can think about the metaverse as kind of a 3D version of the internet that you can move around in. It's open, it's interconnected, not controlled by any one company or organization. Now, this is kind of a manifesto. Can be accessed in VR, AR, but also through any kind of device. So it's not device specific. And it's persistent, it's parallel, it's always there. You can go to it anytime. Now this is, I really like these 7 rules for the metaverse that former Unity CEO, creative director, Tony Parisi, who was like really important pioneer in open protocol for the 3D internet. He came up with these, right? There's only one metaverse. The metaverse is for everyone. Nobody controls the metaverse. The metaverse is open. The metaverse is hardware independent. Talked about a little bit of that. The metaverse is a network. The metaverse is the internet. Okay, so that kind of simplifies it, right? Yeah, the metaverse is the internet. We already have open protocols. We already have ways that people can interact without like being in a closed environment. Nobody controls the metaverse. You know, that's something that's a little more debatable, right? I'm not going to play any of these videos, but as soon as I showed this, you probably had a reaction. Facebook has been kind of leading the way as far as not only they've been pouring a lot of money into metaverse technologies, especially headsets and the hardware and everything. But there are also a lot of implications and problems that come with something like that, where we're talking about data privacy, biometric privacy, motivations.
Congratulations on.
So like I said, Facebook, especially in the last year since they changed their name to Meta, has been spending a lot of money, pouring a lot of money into the metaverse division. They call it their Reality Labs, and they expect to continue spending that money. This is from October of 2021, right? Well, there are problems with one company developing this and owning it, right? Well, this is just in June, and there's since been more headlines about how Meta's ad revenue has really hurt the metaverse plans. They've kind of scaled back on some things. It seems like they're still dedicated to it, but there are other companies with different priorities, I guess, and that are working in this space. Okay, this is an example of a company called Jadu that's working to create. Let's see if I can play this. An AR blockchain mobile game. They've been working on this for a while, and they are planning to sell these avatars as NFTs and create kind of a digital twin environment, augmented reality environment where people can play with these, right? So that's one vision. Another vision of the metaverse, Snapchat or Snap, thinks that the metaverse is ambiguous and hypothetical. So they also are, Snap is a leader in augmented reality technology through the app. It's driven by AR, face filters, even spatial storytelling using 3D objects and that kind of thing. They have a kind of another version of it where they don't think that people will necessarily spend a lot of time in the virtual world, like a totally virtual world, and would rather spend time in the real world that's augmented. So they have actually worked on developing glasses and other technologies and building out their AR capability through their app. But moving on from the metaverse, let's talk about, this is separate from the discussion about whether people will spend all their lives in the metaverse. Now, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, at least especially short term. But let's talk about like examples of XR, AR and VR use right now, specifically VR storytelling, XR in industry, XR in healthcare, mobile and social AR, and social VR. So there's a lot of nonfiction and cinematic storytelling that's happening. This is an example of, actually, let me cue this up. This is an example of a story it's self-explanatory, but basically it takes holographic captures of real people, so real actors, places them into a CG environment, and tells the story of a day in Notorious Day in Israel.
I was born and raised in Hawaii. This has been my home for my entire life. I was excited to go into work Saturday. I was just finished getting ready and my phone alarm went off and I'm thinking, oh, it's gonna be like a flood alert. We get those a lot. But I looked down at it and I froze. Like I looked at it and I could not believe what I was looking at.
You initially can't even process it. It's something you have to stare at for a moment and say, wait a minute, what is this? This is not possible. And then the fear jumps in. This could be possible. And straight away I realized if I'm getting this message, so is everyone across the island.
The U.S. Pacific Command has detected a missile threat to Hawaii. A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. This is not a drill. If you are indoors, stay indoors. If you are outdoors, seek immediate shelter and remain reported.
There was this impulse first to be with loved ones. If people were with their kids, it was, you know, where do we go to protect them? How do we protect them? Our girls are 7 miles away, and Bruce said, I don't know if this is real or not, but I need to be with them. What I should absolutely know, that if this was real and there was a ballistic missile coming to us, that I would probably never see him again.
So this is told using real stories, real audio recordings, interviews with people who were in Hawaii when this message went out. And it's really an exploration of, you know, telling the story in an immersive way to kind of make you feel like, not like you were there necessarily, but to make you feel immersed in the environment and explore what you would do in this situation. So it's a linear story, it's a linear video. It's not like a game that you would play, but it's told in VR using CG. So other examples of VR storytelling, and this one is more 360 video, which we can say technically isn't VR because you can't really move around. You're stuck in one space when you're viewing 360 video. But 360 video can make you feel immersed into an environment. And in this video specifically, when you're you know, listening to the interviews and you feel like you're sitting there listening to experiences, it does feel like you do have a stronger connection. And I'll go ahead and play this.
My mother was born in South Carolina. We had a lot of relatives and a family farm still in Charleston, and so we would travel down often. We packed everything into the car and we did it in one shot. We never stopped. I never understood why. They did this because they had to. It's just the reality of being Black in America. Up until the passage of the Civil Rights Act, you couldn't eat in restaurants, you couldn't stay in hotels if you were Black. The Green Book was a much-needed guidebook for African Americans. By knowing who was friendly and where you could stay, you could actually travel through an America that was pretty hostile to you. The Green Book served as a way of bringing Black people together as a community. And what Ben's Chili Bowl represented to me was that community and safe space. With my VR film, Traveling While Black, I wanted to connect the past that had been forgotten to the present. In VR, the level of connection that you have to a story can be profound. It's real and it's tangible. You are forced to a place of deep empathy, or you're forced to confront the pain of what you've been living. There's something about not being able to escape it.
I wasn't finished raising him, you know? I wasn't finished nourishing him.
You are forced to think about other people in a way that 2D film can't accomplish. The viewers walk away wanting to do something. They want action.
So so VR can really be a persuasive form of storytelling. You know, I mean, as a journalist, that's, you know, like I said earlier, that's like, you know, one of the most powerful moving parts of working in this is that it can be really, really empathy inspiring, I guess. Okay, so moving on to XR and Industry 634. Okay, so we're good. There are a ton of applications. You know, for example, in architecture, there are examples where there's actually a digital twin unit at this architecture firm in Vietnam that's working with creating digital twins or scans of entire spaces. For example, the Hong Kong airport. which is huge and really complex. And by taking the digital twin and creating a 3D model of the airport and connecting all of the points of data that are coming through that airport, whether it's like passengers, planes, baggage, all the other operations in the airport, they can better keep an eye on capacity and any problems that might arise. And they can also view that because it's a 3D space, they can project it into AR, they can use it in VR to view this in a more immersive way. In healthcare, there are a ton of applications. Again, this is one example of training new doctors on bedside manner, teaching how to work with patients using the HoloLens, which is AR glasses, where that you can project a patient and into the room that you're in, and you can interact with them as if they were there.
This world-first mixed reality technology is the future of medical training.
Hi guys, my name is Aniket Bharadwaj. I've been a doctor for 2 years, and in the future I want to be a surgeon. Throughout medical school we had situations where patients would come in and act as actors, and obviously with the pandemic hitting, a lot of that pivoted to tablet-based kind of interactions because obviously the risk to patients. But if we have something like this would really take training to a bit more interactive and realistic level.
It's been developed by an American technology company, Cambridge University, and doctors at Addenbrooke's Hospital, who made sure it was as realistic as possible.
It feels very much more that you're connected to the scenario. And when you feel this patient, when you see the visuals, when you see their neck muscles straining, when you see the way that they're breathing, in a trained eye of a doctor will tell a lot from how a patient's chest rises and falls. And we've spent a lot of time trying to get that exactly right.
So, and like a lot of these things, whether it's I'm showing you 360 video on a 2D screen, or showing you an example, a video about the HoloLens and how you can use that to project things into the environment, it's much more impressive and to actually view it in person. And that's what we're going to do in this class. We're gonna use these devices and really experience those. So another example of VR in healthcare is doctor over at Cedars-Sinai in LA, Brendan Spiegel. He's working on using VR to help ease chronic pain, especially in people recovering from people who would normally be prescribed opioids. To use VR as a distraction mechanism, but also sorry, I lost it. As a distraction, but also as to treat chronic pain. Move on from that. So another example of using augmented reality, mobile and social augmented reality, specifically in Instagram, is recently the New York Times research and R&D department has developed an entire Instagram, they have an Instagram team working on effects. They kind of do, let's see if I can link out to this. They have a library of AR effects that they've developed, everything from visualizing the California megastorm in your environment to things related to COVID and mask wearing, and visualizing those through augmented reality on your phone. So phone-based AR. We've also been doing a little bit of this in my classes. I've been working on capturing holographic video and putting those into mobile AR experiences, because that's how most people experience augmented reality, through their phones. And social in VR, or social VR, whether it's in apps like VRChat or Horizon Worlds or Mozilla Hubs, all of which we talk about and test out in this class, is becoming, increasingly viewed as reality. So there's actually a documentary just that was completely filmed in VRChat, which is a social VR app, about people who met in virtual reality.
Making friends here is sometimes what saves people's lives, or what gets them up out of bed in the morning.
I am
teacher for Helping Hands, a sign language community here in VR chat. Hand rested under our elbow, and we're gonna go like this. Christmas.
Slow. Quick, slow. If I had confidence that I could teach dance as a living in VR, I totally would do exactly that.
With a long-distance relationship, having VR is a game changer.
We are 5,000 miles apart, but we're gonna try our best to make it work.
This year has been really hard. The thing that has kept me sane has been VR and the VR community. I would not have weathered this without you guys. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year!
You can be who you've always wanted to be, and you can, in a way, start over.
We can come together and support each other. This community means a lot to me, and I really want them to know that they're loved.
It's been a year since I've seen Kevin's IRL body.
Sounds
or his
funny.
IRL avatar.
So probably not unusual to think about this. I mean, you know, there are entire relationships, friendships that exist just in massive multiplayer games. Same thing in VR, like in VR chat. Okay, so moving on to the course, some key questions that that we're going to look at and we're going to talk about in the class and extending reality. One, how do we define reality in a world where a digital identity can often seem as important as our physical selves? How do augmented and virtual reality and mixed reality represent a change in how humans interact with our physical world and digital information? Talked a little bit about that earlier. And in what ways can we use this emerging technology to take advantage of its possibilities while also considering how it can impact our lives both positively and negatively? So yeah, and then how will the metaverse, more practical, how will the metaverse, augmented and virtual reality impact your future career field? You know, what's going on today? What kind of developments are on the horizon? The course meets in the Media Innovation Center, which I'm in right now. This is where I am most of the time. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it'll be the same in the spring. From 2 to 3:15 in the Media Innovation Center. We're on the 4th floor of Evansdale Crossing, which is right next to the rec center. We have lectures and guest speakers from industry. I'm really excited about who we've got lined up. We've got some AR creators who work creating Snapchat and Instagram effects, specifically for brands, and also people who are working in the healthcare industry. We're also not only doing, you know, having class, right? We're also, all of my classes tend to have a lot of project-based assignments. So we're going to be building AR effects in mobile, VR worlds, and doing some 360 video. And then the first 8 weeks, pretty heavy on lectures and discussions and exercises and tutorials. So you have an opportunity to understand it, but also a chance to be a creator. Second 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, real world project based. So we have some real partners that we're going to work with, and you're going to create some projects that have some pretty rewarding outcomes. And we'll still have some lectures and guest speakers there. The other thing that I'm really excited about is the university through John Saldana at the World Lab at the Global Supply Chain Lab at Chambers has set up WVU as one of the first few universities that's part of the Metaversity initiative, which is actually sponsored by Meta. They're loaning us headsets to use in our classes, and we will have some classes in VR. We're working in an app called Engage, where we can do lessons and meet in VR. Not all the time, but sometimes. It's some examples of some of the projects that we've done in the past and some that are similar to what we're going to do in the future. Again, face effects. We've got some 3D modeling, and then also 360 video and social VR, and just a couple of examples of. So we're not doing anything. Great. So for those of you who are not really into coding or don't feel like you have to have a lot of technological experience, we're going to be using like really simple drag and drop things to build social VR worlds. Like for example, this one in Mozilla Hubs, which is very simple to use. And then 360 video is, like I said, it's like people don't consider it VR, but it is immersive. And we're going to do some simple 360 videos that can be viewed flat screen or in VR. This is one that I produced a couple of years ago about the Cheat River. And that's pretty much it. That's my pitch to sign up for the class in the spring. And I hope we have a full class, and we're already learning a lot. We've already had our first 2 classes, and it's been a lot of fun. Students have been really engaged, and I'm excited to see where this goes. I think that's all I have, but thanks for coming. I'm kind of, as I saw the numbers going up with the participants, I was kind of anxious. So sorry if I was completely disjointed at the beginning of the lecture, but Damien, I thank you for this opportunity, and for everything that the Honors College is doing to support innovation.
Thank you, David. So I did see a question in the, well, as a comment actually, at 6:40, someone said we don't see the presentation screen. So I don't know what went on there. So we apologize. David, if you want to come out of the share screen now, where we have a couple of questions here. Students, we're gonna go open it up for questions this last 14 minutes. So the first one is, I think we can do this. I'm not sure how this one would work, but will you please share all of these resources with participants? These are so mind-boggling. I want to read and see all you have, and some videos I also want to show my kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I can share the slides for sure. And if you had any, if you want me to link to anything else, I can do that too. Or anybody who, this is another thing is, we have an XR working group across the university, people from health sciences to teaching and learning commons and chambers. And I don't know who was asking that, whether it was a professor or not, but if you're interested in this and you want to learn more and you want to participate in this, no matter what college you're at, please reach out to me and I can connect you with people that are involved in this, because we want to expand, XR at WVU.
Okay, so who the individual who submitted that question, just reach out to me, because I will ask David to share his presentation, then I can share with you. Another question here. What negative effects can you see XR and VR having? Or is that a question I have to join the course to get an answer for? So I like that one.
I hate answering these kind of like definitive questions or whatever. So there's a lot of issues related to, okay, so there's, number one, there's a lot of data collection that goes on in specifically social media, but just in our lives in general, whether we're on social or not. Those things are only magnified, tenfold, 100-fold when you're collecting data about biometric information, like where you're looking, and if we're talking about like retinas, pupils, all kinds of things that anything wearable is going to collect. That's a huge thing that we have to think about. And then the other thing is like, who is who has the motivation to promote this field, right? I mean, we see Facebook is really into it, and what's their motivation? Those are some things that we'll talk about in the class too. I've already had some good discussions about that. So not okay, just Facebook. I don't want to pick on Facebook, but and it's also a discussion in XR between like, open source and sharing of technology, and closed source and proprietary technology. There's a lot of that, and we're early in the field, so these things still haven't been figured out.
All right, next question here. Have you used Nreal mixed reality glasses? If so, what are your thoughts?
Nreal? No, I haven't used the Nreal. No, I mean, I've seen those. I have not. We have a Magic Leap and a HoloLens 1 here. I've used the HoloLens 2. But no, I've not used the Nreal. But there are a lot of, we've got like the high-end headsets, like the HoloLens, which are like $3,500, and then there's some others that are coming on the market that are a little bit cheaper and are more geared towards like consumers that are the price is gonna come down. Yeah, but I don't see anything right now that's going to make me want to wear AR glasses all the time. I think just like AR and VR right now are still niche, and they're probably always going to be something that's like that we're not going to want to be in all the time. We're not going to want to be in VR 24/7. We're not going to want to have AR glasses on all the time. I should not say that. I shouldn't make any declarations, but I think that's short term for me, at least. I feel like that.
Okay, next question here. Is it possible for the plateau of productivity to eventually exceed our initial peak of expectation?
Oh, of course. I mean, yeah, I mean, of course. I think that's honestly probably one of the things that excites me about, you know, this kind of innovation and innovative technology, is that we don't know where this is going. You know, it could be something that's always going to be a niche and not going to be the revolution in computing that people are predicting, or it could be something that, because the technological advances, you know, become way more useful and way more applicable, and where we really are looking at like, what is reality? Like, what is the reality that we want to live in?
I'm not even sure if I actually even understood that question, but
I just went with it. So
it sounded good. So attendees, do we have any other questions for David? All right, well, let's I got one more spiel here to give. I think you're seeing my screen here. So I got one more thing to say. Y'all can probably see it there. Okay, we appreciate, no, that's wrong. Well, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you this evening. If you have any additional questions about the course, please feel free to reach out to David. David's email is david.smith18@mail.wvu.edu. An archived version of this webinar will be available later on the Honors College website. I think David just popped it in the chat there. Thank you for spending time with us. Please continue to be safe and have a good evening. So, David, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. It was well done, and I took some things away from it, and now I have a better understanding of what you're trying to do in extended reality. And I look forward to visiting your class in October, so that we can figure out how we can work together. So, thank you all. Thank you all, and everyone have a good and safe evening. Bye-bye.